Prateek, you have to start.
Okay, sir. Good evening, everyone. I am CA Prateek Arya, President, Hisar branch of NIRC of ICI. Today, here I am welcome you all in this prestigious virtual webinar organized by DAB, Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, and hosted by Hisar branch of NIRC of ICI. My warm welcome to CA Charanjot Singh Nanda ji, Chairman DAB, CA Dayanivas Sharma ji, Vice Chairman DAB in absentia, CA Pawan Kumar Mittal ji, Chairman Hisar branch, all respected senior members, my young professional colleagues, and honorable guest speakers of today's seminar, CA Shailesh Kaushik ji and Uday Kulkarni ji. Firstly, I invite CA Pawan Kumar Mittal ji, Chairman Hisar branch, to deliver his opening remarks. Pawan ji is in Management Committee of Hisar branch for 2019, and currently Pawan ji is Chairman of Hisar branch. Pawan ji.
Thank you, Prateek. Good evening, friends. Thank you, Deb, for providing this opportunity to Hisar branch of NIRC of ICI. Respected CA Charanjot Singh Nanda ji, a golden-hearted man, and Chairman of DAB and IESD. Honorable Dayanivas Sharma ji, Vice Chairman of the DAB. CA Uday Kulkarni ji, guest speaker of the day, and very down-to-earth and knowledgeable personality. Sri Shailesh Kaushik ji, second technical speaker of the day. CA Dr. Amit Gupta ji, Secretary of the DAB and his team. I welcome you all on behalf of Hisar branch of NIRC of ICI. Today's world is changing very fast. Technology is going to change every moment. In 1865, when Abraham Lincoln, the president of USA, was assassinated, it takes 6 months to know about this news to Europe. And 1969, after 104 years, when Neil Armstrong went on moon, it takes only 90 seconds to spread this news across the world. 104 साल में इतना चेंज आया कि यूएसए से यूरोप तक न्यूज आने में 6 का टाइम लगा और चांद से और धरती पे पूरे वर्ल्ड में न्यूज आने में सिर्फ 90 सेकंड का टाइम लगा. सो ये टेक्नोलॉजी की वजह से कि टेक्नोलॉजी वेरी ड्रास्टिकली चेंज हो रही है. नाउ वी आर इन 2022, आज हम 2022 में हैं. सो with these dynamic changes in technology, we are getting so many challenges as like cyber fraud and all. So in this dynamic world, forensic accounting and investigation standards are very important to all of us, specifically for the chartered accountants who are in practice. And in the dynamic leadership of Nanda sir, our DAB is doing very well to develop the standards and to regulate the forensic accounting in India. Again, I welcome you all on behalf of Hisar branch of NIRC of ICI, and thank you, DAB, to provide this opportunity to the Hisar branch. Thank you, Nanda sir, Dayanivas sir, and all. Thank you so much. Hand over to Prateek.
Thank you, Pawan sir. Now I invite CA Charanjot Singh Nanda ji, Chairman DAB, to deliver his keynote address. Nanda ji is in CC member from 2004 to 2016, then 2019 to 22. Nanda ji is also NIRC chairman in 2002-2003, NIRC member in 6 years 1998 to 2004. Currently, Nanda ji is holding chairmanship of 3 committees: DAB, Digital Accounting and Assurance Board, Internal Audit Standards Board, Committee on IT of South Indian Federation, and also Vice Chairman of Banking, Financial Services and Insurance Committee. Nanda ji, we welcome you for keynote address to our members.
Thanks a lot, Prateek ji. CA Pawan Mittal, my younger brother and chairman of Hisar branch, Mr. Prateek Arya, the moderator of today's session and treasurer, the 2 very respected and revered faculties, Shailesh Kaushik ji and Uday Kulkarni ji, the office led by Amit Gupta, the secretary, and all who have come here to go home more enlightened. Ladies and gentlemen, I am truly honored to bring before you yet another exciting session of Digital Accounting and Assurance Board. Your institute has done wonders. It has created so many benchmarks that it will be difficult for people to breach. First, Your institute is the only institute under the ages to bring out 23 forensic investigative accounting standards. No one in the world has got that. Second, your institute is the first in the world to come out with guidance on remote audit way back on 20th March 2020 when COVID had barely come in. Your institute is the first to host the World Congress of Accountants in Mumbai and ensure that more than 11,000 members are serviced. The greatest record in 118 years. Not a single dissatisfied person went away from the conference. It is a talk not only of the town or of the country or the city, it is talk of the globe now. All are discussing this and explaining how India could create such a great infrastructure to service everything. Ladies and gentlemen, today's session is a very exciting session. Discussions on financial, investigative and accounting standards. And this is done by none other than those people who have been involved in creating and drafting the standards. Yes, it is from the horse's mouth. Each and every comma, full stop has an relevance. And today, everything we put into the right perspective. Learning, knowing things, honing your technical skills is very important. There is a couplet which says, "Ghar khairat mein milti kamyabi to har shakhs kamyab hota." गर खैरात में मिलती कामयाबी तो हर शख्स कामयाब होता, फिर कदर ना होती किसी हुनर की और ना ही कोई शख्स शैलेश जी की तरह लाजवाब होता। तो मेहनत लाजवाबी के लिए आपको समझना पड़ना है, डूबना पड़ता है। And the board has given you opportunities. I will not stand between you and Shailesh ji, but I would like to tell you that we at the board are always available to you at every beck and corner. Pick up your phone, call me, write a message to me, WhatsApp me. We are there to ensure that we give best of the faculties and best of subject matter so that you are able to effectively service and create value and worth not only for your clients or stakeholders, but for the regulators and government as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, over to an exciting session on financial, investigative, and accounting standards. Over to Mr. Pratik Arya for further proceedings. Mr. Arya, the dais is all yours now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I request CA Shailesh Kaushik ji to enlighten us on overview of forensic accounting and investigation standard. Shailesh Kaushik ji is a professional over 15 years of in the petroleum industries, about 10 years in the IT consulting, and the last few years in the accounting and audit practice. He is also a certified information system auditor, CISA. He is comfortable working in multicultural environment and has managed global ERP implementation projects for Fortune 15 clients and traveled to Europe, Africa, Asia, America, and handled portfolio as diverse as program management, risk management, change management, governance, and control reviews. So we welcome Shailesh ji in for this seminar. Over to Shailesh ji. Shailesh ji.
Thank you so much, Jitendra Arya ji. And thank you so much, Nanda ji. आपने फिर एक बढ़िया शेयर सुना के तबीयत खुश कर दिया.
Thank you, Mr. Kaushik.
Jitendra ji, you are able to see the screen?
Very much, Kaushik sir. Please go ahead.
Okay. All right. As welcome to all of you. And Jitendra ji, if there are questions, they can put them up to you and maybe you can share them with me on the chat. There is no need to wait till the end of the session to take the questions. If they are with the relevant topic, I think I can address them as we go along. If something is outside the topic, we'll address it at the end. ठीक है जितेंद्र जी?
जी sir.
ठीक है. As Nanda ji said, the first thing in this overview is that we are definitely the first in the world. There have been no instance of someone making such a comprehensive list of 23 standards. which covers every aspect of an investigation, starting from the planning to the execution to special areas which are relevant to us. I will be taking through the initial framework, preface, and basic principles, the 100 series and 200 series. My colleague Uday Kulkarni ji will take on from the 300 series onwards. So let's get into first the objectives. The overall objectives are first to get together the best practices in this area, and how we got the best practices we will come to when we talk about how the standards were made. There was a lot of mismatch of expectations, and who a forensic investigator is, what the clients expect, what we deliver. So another objective of this is to bring everyone to a common expectation. Then there were multiple variations of meanings of various important terms. So we will come to that we have a common terminology for the important things. Then definitely we want to set quality benchmarks, as Nandaji mentioned. We want to provide the best of services to whoever are our clients, improve performance, and also provide a basis for guidance and evaluation of performance. And in doing all this, as Nandaji said, CA Institute has done so many things for the first time, and all these together go to protect the ICAI brand. Now, the standards per se, they are into the following categories. There is an introduction, which covers a preface, a framework, and basic principles. And then there is what we call key concepts, which are 4 standards, which talk about risk, nature of engagement, laws and regulations, and applying hypotheses. Then there's the 200 series, which talks about managing an engagement, communication, and things like that. This is where I will be covering. The next part of the session will include how to execute the assignment, specialized areas, how do you do reporting, and there is a quality control standard. Now, this word quality is at the forefront of what we do, as well as the basic purpose of the standards is to provide a certain level of quality to our stakeholders, users of our services. So let's first try to understand what quality means. The first definition I liked before I actually started doing forensic assignments was that of Peter Drucker, a management guru, who says quality in a service is not what you put into it. It's what the client or customer gets out of it. It's a wonderful definition, because he says the client is not worried how much effort you put in, how much you spent in delivering the product or service. He wants to know what you got out of it. The picture talks about a cafe. If the cafe owner is diabetic, he can't be serving everything which is diabetic. That can be to a specific clientele. He has to serve what the people want. That's the only way his cafe will run, both in terms of quality, variety, and price. If he likes books, it's nice to put them on display, but unless his customers are that kind, it's not going to add value to them. If the customers are book lovers, treat it as a place to read, it adds value. So the client is at the foremost of any product or service. It's a fairly good definition. But when we come to forensic accounting and investigation services, the important question is, we will deal with this again in the end when we come to standard 250, which is communication with stakeholders. So when we talk of quality in our service, which stakeholder are we looking at? Are we looking at a bank that appoints us? Are we looking at the borrower whom we are investigating? Are we looking at an investigative agency which is going to take over our report? Are we looking at other lenders other than the bank who have interest in the assignment? So there are multiple stakeholders which come here. So there's a distinction between a primary stakeholder and other stakeholders. We will come to that in more detail, but here our quality should focus on the primary stakeholders. Another definition of Henry Ford, which actually I like a lot more in the context of forensic assignments. Quality is doing it right when nobody is looking. And these standards will help us maintain that quality, set the performance standard, and even excel. So let's go to what the preface is. The preface introduces the standards, and I will give you some background of how this entire process was set. The framework gives us the structure, key definitions. There's a format for all the standards, and then we'll come to the principles. This is part of the initial introduction to these standards. So standards are basically principle-based. So they tell you what is expected when you are getting into a forensic accounting or an investigative assignment. They do not tell you how this is to be executed. The how will come in the form of guidance notes, which are under the preparation, under the leadership of DAB. And but the standard per se talks about what is expected. Now, one thing which is peculiar to forensic assignments, whether they are accounting or investigation, anyone today can do a forensic assignment. Not necessary that they should be chartered accountants. For example, there are a lot of IT professionals into forensic data analysis, retrieval, imaging, and there's a lot of legal professionals engaged in one part of the broad scope of activities there are. So while the standards currently recommendatory and proposed to be mandatory, they would be mandatory only for the CA professionals. But over time, it's likely that they could be the standard for any forensic investigation, depending on the size of the company or the nature of the fraud. It's our effort to make them as universal as possible. Now, this is the methodology which was adopted to set the standards. DAB selects the topic, the timelines. There's a study group which was formed to draft these standards. They go through multiple iterations, then they are presented to DAB. DAB reviews them, gives them back to the study group for rework or additional inputs. When the standards are approved by DAB, they are sent out to the public for comment. And when we sent them out to the public for comment, they included SEBI, CAG, multiple professional bodies. A lot of them wrote back with valuable inputs, suggestions, which were deliberated again by the study group and DAB. Wherever necessary, they were incorporated or suitable amendments made, and then they were submitted to the council, which deliberated and approved the standards so that you see them in your current format of a booklet today. So let's come to the next part, which is framework and definitions. So there are basic principles, there are key concepts, and there are standards, and then there's guidance. And at the bottom, you will see the code of ethics, which is the fabric on which this whole thing is based. And it's common, it doesn't matter. The forensic investigation professional is also a chartered accountant, and the same code of ethics apply to him. The guidance, like I said, is under preparation, and the other 3 have been published. So the standards are fairly concise. I think they go to about 4 to 5 pages. In a couple of cases, I think we've gone to 7. But otherwise, we have tried to keep it as brief as possible and as simple as possible. There's an introduction, there's the objectives, there's the key part, which is the requirement. If some new terms are introduced, they are explained. And there's a documentation or work procedure expected. And effective date, which from which they are expected to be mandatory. Now, 2 definitions are important out of the multiple ones in the framework. We'll talk of forensic accounting and investigation. I will take them up in great detail. But forensic accounting is essentially the discovery and evaluation of the available evidence by a professional to interpret and communicate the findings suitable for a court of law. The word forensic itself comes from forum, which means to prove in a public forum. Investigation is the systematic, critical examination of facts for a specific purpose. We will deal with this in the coming slides. So let's say we learned a lot of new words. And one of the things at least I see when I travel, meeting colleagues across the country, is that these words are sometimes used interchangeably. If you notice, FAIS is forensic accounting and investigation standards. The word audit does not form a part of these standards. So we're separating statutory audit, internal audit, and forensic accounting and investigation as 4 different disciplines in which we will operate. Now, if we look at statutory audit, at the end of statutory audit, we pronounce an opinion on the financial statements, and we do that to give assurance, reasonable assurance. Internal audit, partially legal, depending on the size of the firm or the size of its borrowings. And they also provide assurance. It goes beyond the financials, it gets into operations. And there's a set of standards for both these disciplines. And internal audit could perhaps throw up control gaps, fraud indicators, red flags which need to be investigated further. Forensic accounting, support legal cases. Here, like we discussed, non-CAs are allowed. Report the findings of your evidence. And here too, we are having the standards which we are going to discuss today. Same goes with investigation. Now we look at these things in a little more detail. A statutory audit is sampling. So you're not expected to review every transaction. The end result is only an opinion. And at best, there could be a qualification or a subject to which governs your opinion. Internal audit, like I said, it's broad-based testing for compliance and internal control. Presumption is people are honest, and gaps in internal control are pronounced as gaps, or inadequacy of internal control is pronounced as controls are not adequate. The same goes in statutory audit, given the size and nature of business of the company. At best, there could be a highlighting of possible control gaps, which would leave the company vulnerable to fraud. Now, when we come to forensic accounting, we said this about evidence. It's very narrow. It's very specific. It's very detailed. we have to confirm and identify the nature of the violation. And at the end of it, we may end up in a court of law, depending on how the evidence is finally taken. And why we will end up in a court of law is usually when you do discover a fraudulent transaction and related evidence, the other party will contest it. And if they do go to a court of law, the evidence has to stand the test of cross-examination and the law of evidence. So investigation is even more specific. We have to check for fraudulent intent. When we do investigations, the presumption that everybody is honest doesn't exist. There is a presumption that if there has been a fraud, there would have been coverage of entries to mask the fraud, to hide the fraud, and so that there would be a specific effort to show you that the entries are not fraudulent. The other part of this is to confirm how the fraud was perpetrated. Interviews are a part of it. And then there's a word called predication. No opinion on guilt or innocence is part of the investigation. Now, this is a little contradictory, but I'm sure Udayji will cover this in a lot more detail in his presentation. But an investigator, we will discuss this again, is impartial. He is looking at events, he is looking at people, or looking at transactions, and then summarizing his findings. Those findings are presented to the persons who appointed him. So a judgment on innocence, guilt, punishment are matters to the management if the management appointed them. If the matter goes to an investigative agency, they will end up in court. A judge will form the opinion. So it's a mistake people often make. Investigation does not mean pronunciation of guilt. Investigation does not mean confirmation of innocence. That is the job of the next level of judicial or managerial authority. So there's a word predication which we use. So let's try and understand this word. Whenever we do an investigation, there is a predication. Maybe there was an internal audit report which highlighted some weaknesses. Maybe the management is not satisfied with the reasons given, or the board of directors is not happy as to why the cost of operations has gone up the way it has, or why the cost of purchase of critical raw materials has gone up. So they have probable cause to think that there has been some irregularity at the expense of the company funds. Presence of red flags or fraud indicators are reasonable triggers to commence of investigation. Let's give you some more examples. Observations in audit reports, whistleblower complaints, red flags, multiple red flags, missing, inconsistent reporting, allegations, some abnormal transactions, large purchases, percentage of purchase from related parties going up, value of material of related parties versus open supply, formal complaint of an incident which is required to be investigated. So there are multiple predications based on which a fraud investigation can commence. And while in the general public, they still call them forensic audits. Some of the banks do, I know. Some of the agencies refer to them as forensic audits still. So there's a lot of change management to be done, not only by those in the institute, but also us members in the field to try and change this terminology so that we are able to distinguish between different disciplines as required by the standards. So we've done the preface, we've done the framework. So now let's look at the basic principles, which are fairly simple. On the left side, you have what are the attributes of a professional. So that's pretty common, even with any professional: independence, integrity, objectivity, due professional care, confidentiality. Do we have these skills and competence? If you lack skills or competence in particular areas, you're always permitted to take the help of an expert. We will deal with the standard 230, which talks about the expert. So these are the attributes. Now, the other side is a lot more. So let's take the easiest one first, which is the last one: quality and continuous improvement. We should keep learning, we should keep improving. We should do our work in accordance with 610, which is the quality standard, which Udayji will talk to you about in the latter half of this session. So now let's come to the other ones. The first one is contextualization of a situation. Now, this is very important, that we should have a 360-degree view of any situation. Let me take a couple of examples. Generally, it is thought that if an employee works continuously late, doesn't take leave, for example, it's a red flag because he seems to be covering his tracks. By and large, it is true. But in any CA firm, around the 30th of September, around GST deadlines, everybody is working late. So we need to understand the context in which the anomaly has occurred. Another example is you have these retailers building up stocks, enormous stocks in Christmas, because that's when Amazon comes up with these offers, or Flipkart, or any of these online shops. And that's when even the retail physical shops come up with offers. And it's the maximum sale time. So inventory stockpiling at that time is understandable. Some industries are seasonal. So they do pile up at certain times of the year and not pile up at other times of the year. Air conditioning, woolens, key examples. So it's very important not to look at any evidence or fact in isolation, but in the context of that industry and the way it works. And if there's any specific context to the organization per se, that needs to be taken into account as well. Second basic principle is the primacy of truth. For example, let's say the predication was the high cost of purchase of materials. So the board of directors was of the view that certain costly critical materials must be the place where the anomaly occurs, and we are asked to look there. So that's where we start. But as we go through the data, we find the issue is not with the persons who are suspect, or with the critical high value raw material. They are the larger quantities of smaller materials purchased at a much lower level of management, and with a set of management which were not suspected by the board at all. So which means we need to shift our investigation. We're not here to satisfy anybody to prove that their suspicions were right. We always respect the primacy of truth, so we move the investigation. We need to respect the rights and obligations. Even those who are being investigated have rights and obligations. Their data is private. They have private data. You need permissions. You need to do everything in a correct or legal way. Otherwise, your evidence won't stand in a court of law. The last one is separating facts from opinion. This is very important. The ERP repository or the tally repository, giving you the trial balance, the balance sheet, the transaction list, the journal list, the purchase register, the stock register. These are facts. Now, based on the analysis you do, you come to certain opinions. So what's most important in an investigation is to keep the facts absolute and clear. The minute we mix facts and opinions, we start diluting our report. Because if what we say is a fact is contested, our report will be very difficult to defend in a court of law. So keep the facts separate and keep the opinions separate. Let's come to the standards per se. Nature of engagement. So we did this briefly. Engagements are actually of three types. One relates to forensic accounting. One relates to investigation. And the third relates to what we call litigation support. If the mandate or the requirement of the client is that we should get together evidence, then the concept of forensic accounting will apply. However, like in the previous example, if we are asked to examine the purchase function to check if fraudulent transactions exist and if these possible suspects of fraud are there, that becomes an investigation. Now, every forensic accounting assignment may not end up in an investigation, but you would use forensic accounting in most investigation assignments. Litigation support is can be either part of your forensic accounting or investigation assignment, where you may be called as the forensic investigator to explain the report or provide evidence for the matters stated in the report, or one could be called simply as a witness, which is also litigation support. And witness is someone who reports on what they saw, or you can also be a subject matter expert and give your opinion in litigation support with respect to the issues under discussion. So examples of forensic accounting services: financial statement manipulation, fund diversions, asset tracing, anti-money laundering, related party transactions, valuations, estimations of loss and damage, suspicious transactions in IBC. You could also, in fact, use forensic accounting for positive things like due diligence. Look at the contentions of a company in possibly support for an M&A deal. So you could also use forensic accounting services for reconstruction of accounts where data is lost due to disk damage, server damage, or whatever reason, to rebuild the accounts, reconstruct the account. So forensic accounting services are there for multiple purposes. Investigation services we talked about could be claims, ethical conduct violations, fraud violations, investigation of whistleblower complaints, even related allegations, thefts, bribery, corruption, data breach, theft of intellectual property. Actually, with so much of information technology services, which are there is a lot of assignments coming in the way of protection of data privacy, protection of data, need to know basis, who all come in contact with, especially for those outsourcing agencies which are doing work for American, European, and other foreign countries. We match their standards of data protection, data privacy, etc. So investigation also, there are multiple avenues of practice. The third type, like we said, is litigation support. So like we said, you can be a fact witness, you can be an expert witness, and you could do what we say is alternative dispute resolution. So arbitration, conciliation. There are those mechanisms also which help. So those support services also can be part of. So when we are talking of 110, we need to be clear what is our nature of engagement. Are we doing forensic accounting? Are we investigating? Or are we providing litigation support? Is there a little element of each of them? Once we are clear on the nature of engagement, we would be able to approach the scope, understand whether we have the attributes, the skills, the competence. So this is the first part of assessment of the next part is what we call understand the fraud risk. Fraud risk is basically the likelihood that fraud can occur in that organization. So there are fraud indicators, there are multiple methods. I will talk about one which is taught in the forensic accounting and fraud detection course conducted by DAB. And that talks about the fraud triangle. This was a triangle developed by analysis of multiple fraudulent transactions and fraudsters. And he identified, that is, Cressy identified 3 elements which are necessary for a fraud to occur. So the first point he identified is pressure. The second that he identified is opportunity. And the third is rationalization. So let's understand this a little bit so that then the balance standards become a lot easier. If there are unreasonable targets for sales, it's quite likely to meet the targets, earn the commission. There is a chance that people would commit fraud. If regulatory compliance is very complicated and you're not able to meet the deadline, there is a chance that people would go under to meet the requirements. And there are multiple ways of pressure. There's a new product launch. There's a person in possession of confidential, sensitive information, which has a value in the market. People are coming with an IPO. There is a presentation to venture capitalists on how the company is and how the industry will do. These are all high pressure situations which tempt people into manipulating financial statements. So you need to be aware of how that client is operating. What is its operational environment? Are there pressures? Then there is what we call opportunity. Opportunity, in one sense, is simple. It's weaknesses in internal control. Every weakness in internal control is an opportunity for a fraudster. So the other way of looking at opportunity is, for example, in commodity-related industries, cement, coal, oil, sand, there are always commodity-related frauds. In high cash-related transactions, there is always a likelihood of fraud because these elements are easily marketable. So you don't need a great deal of expertise to be able to manipulate cash and inventory. So though you need to be looking at the kind of transactions there are, the nature of the industry to understand industry-specific opportunities. Understaff is an opportunity where a person will perform multiple tasks. That's an opportunity. For example, in many companies on Diwali or any major holidays, they work with a kind of skeletal staff. And the staff who work there usually have far higher authorities than they normally would, which again is a weakness of control. The last one is rationalization. This is very important. This is when the company is actually being unfair. So the people are trying to take revenge on the company. Poorly paid, badly treated, not promoted, unpaid suppliers, unreasonable rejection of supplier materials. These all create an angry ecosystem around the company. So these are our matters we look at to assess how likely is it that frauds will happen in this company, which are our areas of prioritization, where frauds are more likely to occur. Is the fraud risk at an acceptable level? Have they done enough to mitigate the inherent risks which are there? So that's part of standard understanding fraud risk. And when we do our report, we have to give consideration to the fraud risk areas and explain what we have done. Next part is laws and regulations. Now this standard looks at laws and regulations in two ways. There are some laws and regulations which govern almost every assignment. For example, if it's a loan-related assignment on default of loan or diversion of loan, then I guess the RBI Master Circular would apply. If it's related to an investigation of a company, Companies Act would apply. In all cases, the law of evidence would apply. As far as regular evidence is concerned, in other cases, we would be looking at the Information Technology Act and the related evidence requirements from the IT Act. If it's to do with insurance, you would have insurance acts. If it's FEMA. So depending on what the laws are, it would be specific. The other specific law we can look at is IBC. IBC has specific requirements on preferential transactions, extortionate, fraudulent trading, wrong trading. So you specifically need to comment on those. So wherever the Act specifically requires us to do something, we are governed by the Act. There could be also like the previous example I gave you, where the board of directors wanted you to look at the CEO or the COO and his area of operation. And that becomes a contractual arrangement. So while there would be a compliance aspect with respect to reporting and other things, the primary governing factor behind this would be the contractual arrangement with the board of directors. Now, there is a point at the end. We need to understand what are the laws which impact us, make sure our plan covers deviations and stuff from those regulations. Where it is complex, we can always seek expert legal advice. Sorry. And the last one is about the principle of natural justice. was a very important concept in law. So it would help to spend a little time about the principles of natural justice. First one is allow the person to be heard. There's a new one which is coming up in courts, and I'm seeing this becoming very frequent in the last couple of years. In fact, I've seen at least 3 cases personally where the matter went to the High Court. The High Court turned down the report of the forensic investigator and called for a fresh investigation. They did not at any time comment on the adequacy of the investigation. The comment was that the borrower has not got a chance to respond to the allegations made in the forensic investigation, and the response of the borrower is not being considered by the investigator. The court goes on to say that even if the investigator has not taken that into cognizance, the lenders have to give the opportunity to the borrower to present his side of the case and then ask the investigator to include that with a final conclusion. The next principle of natural justice is fairness in dealing. We have to be fair as investigators, no bias, integrity. Coming back to the principle of basic principles. If there are gaps in laws and procedures, they need to be addressed. Fundamental rights have to be protected. We've covered this in the standards. The basic principles talks about respecting rights and obligations. No possibility of miscarriage of justice. Decisions taken by anybody, they should be valid. They should be supported by evidence and reasonable grounds to support any findings and analysis. So for us to stand the test of law, we have to adhere to the principles of natural justice. The last one in this section is what we call applying hypotheses. Hypothesis is a term generally used in scientific experiments. So to take the famous example of the electric bulb, Edison knew that if he could move the current to the bulb between the two ends, he could be able to create light. But what he could not figure out is what those two ends need to be connected with what material. So he went through multiple options before he finally hit upon tungsten. His hypothesis was it will work, but what he didn't know was what he had to use. Now we apply something very simple in our hypothesis. Let's take the same example if we are appointed by the board to examine procurement transactions. The hypothesis is that there are fraudulent transactions in procurement. So make 2 or 3 sub-hypotheses: high-value items, high-volume items, critical items which are permanently in stock, which have to be there. Classify them depending on the industry, depending on what happens, transit time, and then look and validate during your investigation whether it's possible that there has been fraud in this. Get to a transaction detail, identify anomalies. So at the end of it, you would either be able to prove, disprove, or not prove the theory. Now, there's a wonderful way of doing assignments. The only caveat I will give in this method of doing assignments, it applies to everybody, even the most senior of professionals. It happens to me, but I'm aware that it happens to me and try to keep myself in control. we get very attached to our hypothesis, especially halfway through the investigation. If everything which we are doing is supporting the hypothesis, then we are attached to that hypothesis. We tend to ignore items which don't match the hypothesis, which means we're not being objective. We are having bias. So hypothesis is good, but don't get so attached to the hypothesis, because you can see here, disproving your hypothesis is also part of the investigation. And in a forensic investigation, there are always vested interests which are interested in one side of the hypothesis or the other. So applying hypothesis, we talked about. Different red flags we saw, whether it is what type of area of suspicion, they could help you form the hypothesis. And hypothesis will also explain how it happens. What is the modus operandi of the fraud? How was it executed? How were they able to bypass the internal controls? So when you run these hypotheses and test them, you come to these. Pratik, are there questions till now when we have covered the introduction? I can take those questions if there are any. And then we will move to the next. Aryaji, you're there?
No, sir, there are no questions till now. You can continue.
Thank you. But please feel free to put your questions. It's a lot simpler when you ask the question with the slide and with the topic rather than at the end. Of course, I will take anything at the end also. All right. Now we come to the next set of standards. These are about managing the engagement. The engagement objectives 210 flows directly from 110. What is the purpose? Is it forensic? Is it investigation? Now, like I said, that investigation nature flows into the scope. So this will explain to you what are the things you need and what are the things that you have to do. What are the skills you need? Do you need experts? Do you need tools? If there's a lot of forensic investigation of 5 years, 6 years, it's a IBC case, and you need possibly imaging tools to recover data. All this becomes clear between 110 and 210. 220. 220 is, many people when we do these sessions physically have questions on what is the problem in accepting. Work always should be accepted. Areas we should be careful. We should know availability of data. We should be clear. What are the expectations from us with respect to the investigation? What are our frame of reference? If you take IBC cases, in some cases, he has taken over, the resolution professional has taken over the company. And he provides you what he has received on as is where is basis. And the promoters are either absconding, non-cooperative, or not available to you. It's not that you don't take an assignment. I've taken assignments in these conditions. But you need to know clearly what are you getting into. The limitation should form part of the engagement mandate. So now this is another part which we call engagement risk. The fraud risk related to the company specific and the industry in which it operates. The engagement risk relates to what are the limitations in executing my work. And be very clear on who are all your stakeholders. this will flow into standard number 250. Standard number 250 talks about how do we communicate. So identifying all key stakeholders, the individuals who come under this, the direct, indirect, and there's another area where you will also get into what are the statutory or laws or regulations under which the assignment will be completed. And in all cases, and yeah, the other question I get on this, I'm just picking out the questions I get in physical sessions so that we can cover some of them. There are two ways in which we get forensic assignments. One is by way of bidding, in which case there's a tender, and they're expected to bid against that tender. In which case, the company pretty much decides the process of engagement and acceptance. But even in most of the large bids, where you accept their terms and conditions or ask for relaxations in the terms and conditions. And there's a discussion with all the bidders. And if you reach agreement on what terms are acceptable to you and what are not acceptable to you, they ask you to come to the price evaluation stage. Otherwise, they let you go. Now, sometimes we are very tough in the technical evaluation stage, but there could be other bidders who accept all the conditions. So that is a commercial call as for the respective firm, depending on your risk appetite and skills and competence levels you have, on whether you can take an assignment like that or not. But even in tenders and bidding, there is an opportunity to negotiate terms, conditions, and scope. Using the work of an expert. This is a tricky one. And different people approach this kind of work in many different ways. For example, let's understand the standard first. First is we must take permission to appoint an expert, that you should have the ability to outsource. The professional should evaluate the quality and the credentials of the expert and what he does. The professional shall participate in the definition of scope to be done by the expert. He will look at the expert or that the evidence discovered is good enough to support the conclusions. And irrespective of the reputation of the expert, the professional retains I may have got the best person, but I cannot throw my hands off and say the expert said this, so I signed. Signature is mine, I am responsible. So then let us understand where we can use an expert. I'll give you 2 or 3 examples so that the use of expert is clear. Let us say that, no, let us not say, it's a fact that I don't have good knowledge of the stock markets. I am not very comfortable with curb transactions or outside market transactions. I am not very familiar with futures and options. So if there is an investigation which comes my way to investigate, say from SEBI, a stock market manipulation fraud, and a friend of mine, for example, let us take Pratik Arya ji, is an expert in this area. I personally would not use the work of an expert The reason being that I am not competent enough to do 5 and 6. Only if I am competent to do 5 and 6 can I up this assignment on my name. In a situation like this, what I would do, if I have a good enough relation with the client, I would refer them to the expert and say, this man is much better, or this person is much better at this subject than I am. Why don't you give him the work directly? It is not my area of expertise. So that's a clear area where I will not be using an expert. Where would I use an expert? Let us say my area of expertise is companies in manufacturing or service industry or IT industry. So I'm very comfortable with looking at factory operations, transactions, sales, purchases, funding, and things like that. But this particular company buys a lot of commodities from the market. And when they do commodities from the market, they also do a little bit of hedging, protecting them against fluctuations in price. And the hedging part, I am not comfortable with. So that I can give to an expert, because the hedging in this area is a small percentage of the overall work. I understand this scenario, and based on the expert's inputs, I will be able to evaluate on how good the hedging is working to give them some price stability, and how much is it protecting them against fluctuation. Another area where I can, and I have used experts, is let's say we're doing an IBC case, and the promoters are not available. The resolution professional has given me multiple sets of servers. Some of them, for simplicity's sake, has Tally, mail servers. Some of them have designs and supplier masters and stuff like that. But they are all distributed in multiple places, and it's a very difficult exercise to put them all together. But if the information is there, it's an ideal situation to get a data expert who uses a FTK Imager or Encase or similar tool to make images of the data, provide them to me in the format I want, and even do data analysis for 3 years, 4 years, 8 years, that is the requirement. Over here, I am completely in a position to evaluate the work done by the expert, understand how he has done his work. What I am not familiar with is the technology that he uses. But I can always balance and figure out whether the data he's provided me is good enough. Do they tally with the different other sources of data I have? And here again, I am able to retain ultimate responsibility for the conclusion of the expert. So it's only under these circumstances that I personally would use an expert. Then if you are doing a large audit, a large investigation with respect to complexity in some particular laws, maybe FEMA, which apply to that particular, which are a small subset of the overall laws that apply, a legal expert could be fine. Or for example, if we are appointed, like the example I gave you, that the earlier investigator and the primary stakeholders did not share the results with the borrower. as a result of which a fresh investigation is required. So when my report is completed of the second investigation, a legal expert would be most appropriate to make sure that we do not get into issues of principles of natural justice, not having given opportunity, not respecting rights and obligations, not separating fact from opinions, and the other basic principles which again come from natural justice. So these are multiple areas where you can actually use the work of an expert and still maintain responsibility. This is a little tricky. There are multiple agencies for which forensic professionals do work. And a lot of what is defined in this standard is going to define the 300 series, which Uday will cover on executing of assignments. So let's look at some of the agencies. You can work with EOW. One could work with SEBI. A lot of us work with IBA. They are empaneled with IBA. Based on the empanelment, we work with banks. We could be employed by assigned work by CBI, cybercrime, SFIO, which is a Serious Fraud Investigation Agency. So there are multiple agencies which impanel forensic professions. Now, the important thing to understand when we work with them is to understand the frame of reference. Are you appointed by your primary stakeholder, the bank, and asked to coordinate with the agency? Or are you subcontracted by the agency to help them in their investigation, which they are doing so? Two are entirely different. One is I am the prime investigator, but since my work will finally go to a particular agency, I have to keep their requirements in mind. The other area where I work with the agency is, and many practitioners work with the agencies like this, that you work on behalf of the agency for doing their work. Now, in fact, even the income tax department sometimes outsources search and seizure and stuff like that. So then you are virtually a virtual arm of whether it is EOW, CBI, income tax, GST, or whatever. So in which case, it's very important to gain an understanding of the laws and regulations of that particular agency. The second thing which is very critical in such assignments is to understand the evidence custody, which should be clarified. Is the ultimate custody of evidence, if I do a forensic assignment on my own, the onus of preserving evidence, preserving what we call the chain of custody of evidence comes upon me. So I think that's a new word I introduced. So maybe I'll explain that. Chain of custody means I should be able to prove, for example, let's say I took a backup of an ERP data from the customer servers. Whoever was the data owner, could be the CIO, could be the CEO, could be the RP, depending on the circumstances. The data should have been taken from their presence. I should have made a copy of the data. We should have done totals to confirm that the original and my copy are the same. At every stage when I did analysis or reporting from that data, I should confirm that the data is the same. Whenever the data moves in different custodies, we maintain a chain. This data was handed over by this person on this date. So the entire chain is available to prove the authenticity of the data when the matter comes up before court of law. Now, that is my responsibility when I am the investigator or the investigating professional. If the agency is contracting me, they would be ideally the persons to whom I would have to hand over the chain of custody. So recording that handover and making sure that is a very important scope and planned procedure. Confidentiality. The agencies. Sometimes I observe, it happens to me also. When working with an agency, we seem to assume that we inherit the powers of the agency. That is not correct. Agency powers remain with the agency. We don't become CBI. We don't become SEBI. So functions are best left to the agency. The kind of harsh investigation, the harsh interrogation, but we should not be driving it. Our job should be primarily sharing of evidence, summarizing the findings, presenting it to the agency. And always keep backup, even if the evidence is as per your terms to be handed over to the agency. Always keep a copy of the evidence in your custody, so that if questions are asked as to how this report came, you are able to satisfy the law of natural justice, which means decisions should be grounded based on evidence and reasonable ground should be there. Very significant in terms of especially law enforcement. Language in communication is paramount. In many cases, the agency uses the professional's report for the next stage of work, which is either prosecution or FIR. So language in those kinds of communications have to be very, very carefully worded. So any drastic step taken by the agency based on our communication or report, we should be able to substantiate. If there is evidence, if there is supporting, definitely we should write. But nothing on which there is no evidence, especially when we deal with any of these three kinds of agencies. Regulations like SEBI, enforcement agencies like CBI, adjudicating authorities, which could be a judicial authority, could be an arbitration, it could be a conciliation. So when we present data here, stick with facts and findings. If you don't have those, then better to say that we didn't find anything. Because we should not be presenting anything for which we don't have any solid ground. Section 250. This standard is about communication. Now, when we discussed the quotation from Peter Drucker, we talked about primary stakeholder and the other stakeholders. So this is complicated. So we will deal with this standard with an example. And let's take an example which is comfortable to everyone. Let us say that there's a particular borrower who has taken loans from a bank. Borrower is defaulting on his financial commitments and it's been declared an NPA. The bank wants an investigation to how this thing turned into an NPA. There's a lot of public domain chatter around the default. There are talks of an insolvency process being initiated. There are talks that somebody is planning to file it. There are talks that investigative agencies are also doing investigations in this place. And that is the usual noise which goes around a forensic investigation. So our primary stakeholder is the bank that appointed us. That is the first clarity. Now, if it is clear that there are others, obviously there is a second stakeholder. The second stakeholder is the borrower. He's an indirect stakeholder because without the borrower, I can't do the investigation. And I require the cooperation of the borrower to do my investigation. And here again, my cooperation comes when I am independent, not biased, and I'm not prejudging the borrower. So the lines of communication between me, the borrower, and the bank have to be defined in our communication protocol. Do I ask for information directly? Do I get it through the bank? Am I allowed to take information directly? Are there other stakeholders? If I want to do, for example, balance verifications, if I want to approach other members of the consortium, usually we are appointed by the lead bank. So is it possible to approach other consortium members? Do we go through the bank? Do we go directly? How are meetings with the consortium arranged? Are they done by the lead bank? Is it necessary for the borrower to be present in any presentation made to the consortium? Or if there is a joint lender kind of scenario, is the borrower necessary to come there? If I don't get cooperation from the borrower, where do I go? So these are all matters which require clear communication with the bank. And this is just without an agency in the picture. If agencies are in the picture, sometimes the matter is not entirely in your hands. They're not in mine, at least. But what we do try to do is we are with the bank. If the agency wants something on progress of investigation, it's ideal that they get it from the bank. Now, the second part of communication, certain amount of communication is important. But what constitutes communication is left to the best judgment of the professional. For example, I'll give you two simple examples. I think I am running a little out of time, but I'll give you two examples before I close. One, I need to visit a factory of the borrower in Haryana. And I have to communicate to the borrower that I want to go there. Because otherwise, the relevant infrastructure will not be available to. He has to intimate his factory manager that the forensic investigator is coming. He has to see these records. Now, the exact purpose of my visit, I may not explain in great detail. I may want to look at inventory, but I will possibly tell him I'm looking at inventory. I would want to look at job work. I would like to be looking at production details. And I would like to be looking at transportation, billing, and stuff like that. So I give him a broad canvas so that he's not clear as to exactly what this guy is going to do there. So some communication is important, but in what detail you are going to tell them what you're doing, again, that is left to the discretion of the profession. And when we want to do interviews, again, the subject of the interview can be fairly broad and vague. But again, you need the permission of the borrower, the client, to meet the key management personnel, to meet, let's say, warehouse people, to meet purchase people, to be able to get data, IT people. So that communication is very important. And by now, I think all of us are very clear. Communication with public or media is not our area. Now, what we talk about communication, we divide it into two categories. One is essential, and the other is what we call significant. Essential is what is the scope and methodology. We said protocol for communication. What laws apply? What is the kind of cooperation we need from primary and other stakeholders? Resource, reporting, fees. What's the format in which they want your data? These relate to primarily the engagement. Significant matters are things which come up in the course of execution. Lack of cooperation, not finding data, not being allowed to visit particular places, some kind of threat perception, potential conflicts of interest, related parties, non-availability of evidence, destruction of things you saw yesterday, not there today. And in the end, you have what is called break in chain of custody or of evidences. And finally, we talked of examples from commodities. We see them in the papers. If you're dealing with the sand mafia, if you're dealing with a coal mafia, you're dealing with an oil mafia, there are life-threatening and safety-related situations. Sometimes there may be a situation that arises that because of this you can't complete the assignment, in which case you document the reasons. In reporting, I think Udayji will cover that. In such situations, you can document, say what you've done so far, why you could not proceed, whether it was lack of data, lack of cooperation, lack of access, destruction of evidence, or whatever is your reason, life-threatening situation, personal safety, and make a closure. This is what I did. This is what is available. I can't do any further. So that completes communication with stakeholders. The next step is the 300 series, which Uday Kulkarni will take. But before that, I'm quite happy to take if there are any questions.
ऋषि कुछ क्वेश्चंस आए हुए हैं मेंबर्स के, मैं एक बार बताता हूं आपको. How should we satisfy ourselves with the data integrity in such kind of engagement?
Okay. एक ही है.
I'm checking. A question or is there a possibility that can be 2 or more forensic audit teams for specific areas appointed by same stakeholder or multiple stakeholder? दो क्वेश्चन.
Okay. Let us take the first question, which is data integrity. Now, let us take these cases usually arise in insolvency related cases where the promoter is not available. What you have is in custody of the RP. So now basically you have information available in the public domain in terms of audited statements, published balance sheets, published financials. So that gives you some benchmark to state the reliability of your data. You do have access to certain level of working papers. So if you are not able to reasonably verify the integrity of data and satisfy yourself that the data is integrated, then I think it is a showstopper for your engagement. But like I said, you have MCA data, you have related party data, you have related company data, you have multiple audits, you have tax returns. If there is transfer pricing reports, you have stock audit reports with the bank, you have VP related information, you have bank information. So you actually do have a lot of information to validate whether what you have is right or not. If you can't reconcile the differences between the different sources of information, then it is a no-go. Second question is two or more stakeholders on the same assignment. Now, I have not personally seen two forensic investigations by the same agency, by the same appointing authority. But if that is there and you are aware that there are two, I think your scope should be very clearly demarcated and there should be no overlap. Otherwise, it is difficult for both of you to perform. The case which I have seen and been part of is, let us say XYZ and company did the first forensic investigation. For some reason, satisfaction was not there, either because of court intervention or, like I said, it often happens that they didn't give the borrower a chance to respond. So a new investigation is appointed. But they're not parallel. That one is completed. This one is starting after that. I think here we need to take care of two or three things. We don't conflict with a fellow professional. At the same time, by and large, I try to do a completely independent investigation, not rely on their reports, come up with my own conclusions and findings, submit it to the stakeholder. If there are points of conflict in data points, we reconcile the data points. Otherwise, my report is a completely independent report. So, Arya ji? But yes, you have to be more careful if there are two people, because there is a respect for the fellow professional also involved. And at the same time, we don't want two people giving completely divergent reports to the same appointing authority. दोनों की credibility में भी तकलीफ आती है उसके बाद. तो थोड़ा mutual respect और ये ख्याल रखना चाहिए. But at the same time, if you are coming after a forensic investigation or an auditor who is a fellow professional where there have been gaps and things should have been pointed out, I think as long as you stay with facts, there is no issue. You're not putting an opinion on anybody's competence. You are putting the facts which you came to see. Now, whether they should have found that out also or not, that is for the appointing authority to decide. तो उन्होंने नहीं देखा करके मैं नहीं देखूंगा, ऐसा रिस्पेक्ट नहीं होता है. तो मैंने जो देखा मैं लिखूंगा. After that, somebody else can decide कि whether इसमें दम है कि नहीं है. Don't get into judgment, whether it is with the borrower or the fellow professional. Judgment का काम जज को छोड़ दीजिए, आप ठीक रहेंगे. चलिए सर.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, CA Tharaj Kaushik ji, for delivering valuable insight. I am sure this session has made some value addition to the pool of our base. Thank you, Shailesh from Hisar branch of NIRC and from DAB. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Now I request CA Uday Kulkarni ji to enlighten us on overview of forensic accounting and investigation standards. CA Uday Kulkarni ji is a practicing chartered accountant with professional experience of 25 years, a fellow member of ICAI. Uday ji is also CIA certified internal auditor and also certified information system auditor CISA. He is also qualified as insolvency professional under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code of India. Uday ji has also completed digital forensic course. His focus area are information system audit, cyber security, forensic audit, and IBC advisory. He has imparted training on various aspects of forensic auditing, money laundering, legal aspects, and cyber security for legal and investigating officers in Sri Lanka, Nepal, C Institute, RBI Academy, SFIO, SBI Credit Risk Academy, NIBM, etc. Welcome, Uday. Welcome to the seminar by DAB and hosted by Hisar branch of NIRC of ICAI. Over to Uday.
Thank you very much, Pratik. I hope you are getting my sound clear.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And I have purposefully again kept my video off so that this audio could be clear to all the participants. And I hope that will be okay for all of you.
Yes.
Yeah, now I'm going to share the PPT. Let me share the PPT. Is it visible?
Yes, sir. Visible.
Yeah, thank you very much. So thanks, Shailesh, and thank you, Pratik, for giving me this opportunity for interacting on this topic, which I think I and Shailesh, we both have done a lot of discussions when we were developing these standards. But again, it was very nice to listen Shailesh on this. Now, I think the participants might have been clear, I think conceptually at least, that for the forensics, there are a lot of confusion among the stakeholders. Also, sometimes that confusion travels to the professionals, and that's why it was necessary to clarify certain things in the form of 100 series of the standards. And also, it was very necessary under the 200 series about the acceptance and the engagement procedures, and including the standards related to the communication, how to work with the different agencies, and so forth. So now the participants, my friends, all of you are now ready like that. What is the pre-acceptance stages were there? All of those are completed. Now the real crux comes to the execution part of the assignments. So the 300 series deals with the execution parts of this assignment. So we have developed the standards in a particular flow, and that's why you'll find there is some logic between the 100 series, 200 series, which were conceptually explaining everything among the 100 series and the 200 series. So 200 series was elaborating about how to deal with all the things which Shailesh has explained. Under the 300 series, which is particularly related to the executions, how to execute the work actually. And there are 6 standards in this 300 series. And the list is in front of you. I may not read that. I will directly go to the starting of that 310 kind of a standard, which talks about the planning the assignment. Now, in these standards, when you are going to read and apply these standards, many of the times you will find the words are used like the engagement and the assignment. And there could be possibly confusion again in the minds of the professional that why this terminology are getting sometime as an engagement, sometime as an assignment. And to clear that concept again and to avoid any confusion about that terminologies, in the 310 standard, we have defined what is engagement and we have also defined what is assignment. I know that most of the time, all of we are going to handle the assignments. But in case of an investigation, forensic investigation, there could be possibility of getting the conducting the engagement part also. But that engagement could be then separated or parted out in some assignment. In a larger context, you can say that assignment is a sub part of the engagement. Now, I am saying that when we are talking about this standard 310, which is dealing with the planning. So here we are talking specifically the planning of the assignment. We are not talking planning of the engagement. That's what we have to keep in mind. Now, I know that all the fellows here, they all are having the idea about the planning, but most of us are used to do the planning about, the auditing assignments. Because we use these standards in the statutory audit, we use the standards related to the internal audit of a plan. But the differentiating factor between this forensic assignment and the audit assignment makes this standard very, very important. Because every assignment under this forensic could be a different. The nature of the assignment could be different. Even though we say that this is a forensic assignment, as you might have discussed in the 100 series, it could be the nature of the assignment of forensic accounting. It could be the nature of assignment of forensic investigation, or it could be for the litigation support. So at the broader stage, at the first level, when we are starting our planning, we need to have a certain amount of clarity about what is the nature of the engagement. Because when the stakeholders, even though whether it is a primary stakeholder or the appointing agency, we can say here, whenever they are going to appoint us, they don't understand the differentiating point between the forensic accounting, forensic investigation, and the litigation support. They merely say that this is a forensic assignment, this is a forensic service. But we as a professional, we should have a clarity about the nature. According to the nature, what could be the objective of these assignments? After the objective, the next things which we have to consider for the planning is the scope. So if these three things are clearly understood by the professional, then I think the planning will be very much easily could be done. But if the professionals does not have the clarity on this nature, objective, and the scope, then there could be the issue. And whatever we are planning, we need to correlate, we need to map those planning according to these three things: nature, objective, and the scope. That is the first stage of the planning of the assignment. Second, as in the forensic, we are going to collect the evidences, and underlying statement in that evidences is evidences which are acceptable to the court of law. When we say that the evidence is to be acceptable to the court of law, and when the objectives are clear, all our efforts, all our work procedures, all our activities are directed towards the finding of these evidences so that we can conclude in our forensic report. So planning must be around that the activities which are related to the collection of the evidence. That is first point. But having said that, we should not be biased, we should be impartial, we should be neutral. And why these three things are important? Because whatever the evidences we are going to collect, because of that, whatever be the subject matter for which the forensic assignment is carried out, we call it as a fact. That fact could be proved, disproved, or not. And there the element of impartiality at the stage of planning is also equally important. And I would like to say here that all the principles of the forensic services which Shailesh has discussed, they travels across all the standards. Because if you plan the assignments having the bias towards the proving the facts, please understand that if there is an allegation that a particular employee has defrauded the company by making some fictitious payment or by misappropriating the assets of the company. This is a mere allegation. And now you understood that. But because of your biased nature, you will target all your efforts so that you will be able to collect only the evidences which will prove that whether that type of the fraud might have been taken place. But when we are dealing with the hypothesis, as this point number 3 in this standard says in my PPT, when we are formulating the hypothesis, we need to explore the possibilities of not only the evidences about proving the facts, but there could be possibility of disproving or not proving it also. So while planning the assignment, we should be impartial, considering all the possibilities as a part of the hypothesis, and hypothesis formulation is also one of the part of the planning stage. Another important point at the planning stage of the assignment is when we are accepting the assignment, of course, we are evaluating our competence and skill. We cannot entirely outsource our assignment to the expert. And that is what Shailesh has correctly said in his discussion. So, when we are accepting the assignment and when we are planning the activities, we should have a knowledge about the relevant business and the environment. Why it is so? Because depending upon the disputes, we may have to collect the evidences from different sources. Now, I'm not going to talk about the sources as an outside sources. There could be internal sources, there could be outside sources. But even within the organization, within the entity, we may able to collect the evidences as an internal resources. And for that purpose, we need to see that whether we are having the total knowledge about the business. That what does this mean? That all the processes, right from the production up to the accounting, including maintenance, whether we are having the knowledge so that within all those processes, see, in the forensic accounting or investigation, it is not necessarily be only the financial data or accounting data. there is also possibility that we may have to explore the evidences from the non-financial data. So suppose a borrower in a loan fraud case, it's submitting a stock statement, which is a fabricated. When we are evaluating that stock statement, we need to assess whether that much production capacity and storage capacity is available with that particular borrower. It is in the manufacturing kind of it. And for that purpose, the non-financial data, the production related data, the storage related data is also going to give us some of the evidences. And for that purpose, we should have the knowledge about the business processes. And why we have added the word environment, because it could be the digital environment, IT environment, from which also we have to collect the evidences. I am going to talk about that in a specialized standard related to the digital evidences. But these requirement is very, very essential when we are accepting or planning the.
उदय जी,
Yes, sir.
पीपीटी को फुल मोड में ऑन किया जा सकता है, फुल स्क्रीन में?
क्या हो रहा है अभी? नहीं दिखाई दे रहा है?
मेंबर्स की क्वेरी आई है कि प्लीज शेयर द पीपीटी इन फुल स्क्रीन मोड. अगर पॉसिबल है तो देख लीजिए.
It is in the full screen mode.
Okay, no issue.
It is
Continue.
in the full screen mode.
No issue. Continue.
I have मतलब जो पीपीटी स्लाइड शो है ना, वही ऑन किया है.
Okay, sir. Okay, no issue.
Yeah, shall I move on?
Yes, sir. Continue, please. Yeah.
Again, what is the second point into the planning stage? The fraud risk consideration. Normally, which we call in the discussion as a red flags. And about the evidence collections, from which resources we are going to collect the evidence. So evidence could be, as I said, from the internal resources. It could be from the external resources. It could be from the third parties, like the cloud vendor. Or it could be from the public authorities. So when you are developing the overall plan for the assignment, these 5 factors we have to keep in mind. Standard 320 is talking about the evidence and documentation. We all know that when we are doing the forensic, our all efforts are concentrated towards the collection of the evidence. But what is evidence? And what is documentation? Why this segregation is required? Because the documentation which we use in the form of planning, in the form of checklist, in the form of methodologies, or even the documentation which is prescribed under the various standards to demonstrate that we have complied with the standard. That is also part of the documentation. And all the documents which we gather as a part of the forensic assignment may not get qualified as an evidence, but those documents could be useful as a part of our work procedures. Right? So, whenever we are generating any document, we should be aware about that whether this document is useful as an evidence or whether this document is useful for our document as a part of the work procedure. Of course, whatever we are documenting at our end, as I said, planning, checklist, hypothesis, all that is our documentation. But whatever we are gathering at the forensic field level, we need to understand, because ultimately we have to submit our report on the basis of evidences collected, and that evidence has to pass the test of the court of law. So what is evidence? We have defined, and that definition is in front of you. That is information which is written, oral, or contained in the electronic form. So it could be physical, paper-based information. It could be electronic or digital evidences or the documentation, or it could be the statements in the form of oral information. Now, how the evidences could be acceptable to the court of law? Again, there will be the provisions of the Indian Evidence Act which will come into the picture. But when we say that the evidences needs to be acceptable or suitable for the court of law, there are some particular 3 tests which needs to be passed by that document, which we are going to convert it as an evidence. I mean, we are not going to convert it as an evidence, but it may be possible that we are going to submit it as an evidence. So which are those sources? Which are those tests? First thing is that whatever the documents we are getting, and we are supposing that it could be useful for us as an evidence to conclude on this forensic assignment, the evidences should be from the reliable sources. Basically, this question becomes very important when we are dealing with the public document. Many of the times we attempt to gather the evidences related to the public documents by merely downloading from one of the open sources which is available on the search engine. It may be possible. And we interpret that this is a public document. But what is public document which is interpreted in the Evidence Act, that differs from the public document which we are interpreting ourselves. Let's say we want some information related to the company, as Shailesh was talking about in his discussion, that there is a possibility that we can gather the evidences from the MCA. But when we are saying that we have to gather that information as an evidences from the MCA, whether merely downloading that from the MCA site, whether it could be considered as an evidence. So answer would be no, because there are certain provisions by which manner we are collecting that information in the nature of public document. And that's why we are talking about it should be from the reliable sources. Second point here, we have mentioned about the relevancy and sufficiency of the evidences and the documentation. So at the planning stage, we are very clear about the nature, scope, and the objectives. At the planning stage, we are assessing, we have defined what kind of an facts could possibly be come out. And that is also a test described in the Indian Evidence Act, that evidences should be submitted only for the facts in issue or for the relevant facts. So whatever the evidence is, whatever the document which we are supposing here as an evidence is, we have to test that whether it is relevant for the disputes which are in front of us. The next test is the sufficiency of the evidences. Sufficiency depends upon various factors, because mere statement in the oral form may not be sufficient. Even the Evidence Act says that entries in the books of accounts itself are not sufficient. They are relevant, but they are not sufficient. So when these things are there, so we have to collect the additional corroborating evidences so that either the facts could be proved, disproved, or not. So these three tests are very, very important as far as the execution of the work. And when we are saying that we have gathered the evidences, those are going to be acceptable in the court of law. Documentation, as I said, which is a part of our documentation, which is a part, like, as I said, planning, methodology, hypothesis related documentation, our compliance with standard related documentation, all that. I'm not purposefully including here the documentation related to the interview, because for that there is a separate standard. And all other documents could be the property of the profession. The ownership and the custody of the documentation shall be with the professional. But of course, the evidences may be required with the report, because on that basis we have concluded in our report. And in case of an engagement with the agencies where we are directly working for the agencies, as Shailesh has discussed in his earlier discussion, we may have to hand over these evidences by following the certain compliances of a chain of custody to these agencies. So we, the professionals, shall have the clear understanding about the evidences and difference between these evidence and documentation. Standard 330 deals with the conducting work procedures. At the planning stage, what we are going to do, we are developing the work procedures. And as I said, all the work procedures, all our efforts are concentrated upon the discovery of the evidences. So work procedures are basically the activities. And activities should be, again, whenever we are collecting any document, first time when we are collecting anything, it could be the document, then we have to apply the test, as I said, which we discussed in the standard 320. And then we have to satisfy ourselves that it could be considered as an evidence and that will be acceptable by the court. Of course, again, whether it will be getting accepted or not accepted, all that will be decided by the judges in the court. But when we are applying those tests, at that level, it could be mere document. So these work procedures could be divided. I mean, these work procedures, we have divided in the standard as a phase 1 work procedure and phase 2 work procedures. What is the meaning of phase 1 work procedure and phase 2 work procedure? Many of the activities which we are going to do for the performance or conducting this assignment, we are going to deal with some of the activities behind the scene. What does this mean by behind this? So when we are collecting the data, collection of the data, collection of the documentation, analysis or evaluation of those documentation, applying the test of the reliability, relevancy, and sufficiency. All these are the activities which are falling under the phase 1 activities. Phase 2 activities, where there is a need to engage with the relevant stakeholders. So probably when you are going to take the interview of any of the stakeholders, after analyzing, after evaluating the documents, you may have to collect the additional evidences or corroborative evidences. You may take the interview. So that is directly you are engaging with the relevant stakeholder. It could be the primary stakeholder, it could be the other stakeholder. You may have to visit to the borrower's place you may have to search for certain records. There you are directly engaging with the other stakeholder. That we normally call as a field work. You may have to visit some suppliers to confirm the addresses, to confirm the supply of the things, to verify his supply related records. So all that where you are directly engaging with the relevant stakeholders, that those are the phase 2 work procedures. So at the planning stage, we should be very clear about what should be the phase 1 activities, what should be the phase 2 activities, because see, in this forensic assignment, there is a time limitation. In many of the cases, what we have experienced, that there is a time pressure or time limitation we can say. So all these activities needs to be performed within certain amount of the time. It's not like that what we do in the audit, we may buy some time from the stakeholders. But in certain cases of the forensic assignment, it may not be possible to buy the additional. So when we are planning, we should be careful enough to analyze the work procedure, which could be part of the phase 1, which could be the part of the phase 2, and which may go simultaneously or which may dependent on each other. So phase 2 activities may be dependent upon the phase 1 activities. Again, when we say this is again related to the planning stage, that all the work procedures needs to be mapped with the scope of the assignment, objective of the assignment. An important thing here in the work procedure which we have to consider is the fraud indicators. According to the fraud indicators, we may have to apply the relevant tools, techniques, or use of the third-party expert. And use of the third-party expert, Shailesh has again rightly put it there, that entire assignment cannot be outsourced to the expert, but one of the part of the work procedure that could be outsourced to the expert, like the data analysis or the collection of the digital evidence, which is one of the part of this work procedure. In some cases, because of when we are progressing ahead with this assignment, according to our planned work procedure, there could be certain changes in the circumstances. Let us say we are collecting the evidences from a particular data center, and due to some unfortunate things or intentionally that data center was destroyed. At the stage of the planning, we might not have considered such things could happen. But when we are progressing, the things have developed. Or again, Shailesh has given the example, at the time of acceptance of the engagement, the borrower was there. But when we progressed, the borrower was left out the country, abscond, anything. So there could be some changes. According to that, our planning may change, our methodology may change, and due to that, our work procedure may also get changed. So whatever is going to happen with the progress of these things, we may have to communicate as a part of 250 standards to the stakeholders, basically the primary stakeholders. 340 is I may say that it is a kind of a specialized standards, even though it is a part of our execution, because all of the forensic professionals, they may understand that taking an interview from various stakeholders, it could be the primary stakeholders or it could be the other stakeholders. Taking an interview is a bit a tricky thing. And at the same time, it's challenging things, because how to plot the questions, how to get the information, which again, I may say, which could be classified in the category of evidences, All these things comes in our mind when we are getting ready for the interviews. But basically, what is interview? What we are talking here under the standard is what is interview. So the standard refers or defines this interview as a structured formal meeting with the stakeholders, with the individuals. And what is the purpose of this structured formal meeting? So that we can obtain, elicit some of the information which could be a part of the evidence, or it could be corroborated as an evidence. Right. Again, when we are taking the interviews and when the statements are being made to us, in some cases there could be the denial of the disputed charges. In some cases there could be the confession of the guilt. Anything could happen. But when these things are happening during the process of interviews, how to take the cognizance of that? How to prepare for those interviews? What questions needs to be asked? Because there could be possibility that we may plot some direct question. There is a possibility that we may plot some indirect questions. There could be possibility that we may place some vague questions. But surely we are concentrating ourselves for getting some evidences out of that. It may be possible that interviews could be happening two ways. One, before evaluating or analyzing the documentary evidences, or it could be possible that after analyzing or evaluating the documentary evidences, we may going for the interviews. So before taking the interview, we should be well prepared at what stage we are taking the interview. After the analyzing the things, after the analyzing the various physical or digital documents, whether we are taking the statements, it could be possible that we are just corroborating the things, whatever we have analyzed or evaluated from the documents, or it could be other way. Necessarily be whenever we are going to take an interview, as a part of our documentation, the questionnaire, various questions which we are going to put for this interview, that should be kept ready with us. Again, the challenging situation would be that when we are questioning to the primary stakeholders, where we have certain doubt or suspicious that some of the top executives from the management with whom we are working as an appointing agency, they may be involved into these disputes. So how to deal with that situation? Again, we should be very cautious. We should have some documentary or the digital evidences so that we can corroborate their statements and we may be able to establish or conclude the things with these interview as an evidences and corroborating evidences with those statements. Again, acceptance of the statements before the forensic professional as an evidence in the court of law, that is something challenging. But whenever the oral statements are being recorded or being given in the writings with the sign and signature, we have to take some care so that at least we can safeguard our professional interest. Standard 350 is dealing with the review and the supervision. Now, again, review and supervision, two different terminologies we have defined in this 350. So basically, review is related to the examination of the work procedures, review of the work performed, or review of the documentation. Because see what happens here. For the forensic assignment, definitely we are going to engage a team from our firm. It may be possible that all the team members may be aware about the test of the document which could be able to submit as an evidence, and some of the team members may not be available about the tests by which the document could be able to submit as an evidence. So many of the times, our team members may tell us, may show us that, okay, this is a document which we can consider as an evidence. But it's the responsibility of the professional to review that whether that document, by applying the 3 tests, which I have already told, are really going to be useful as an evidence on the basis of which we are concluding. And when our team members are applying their efforts as a part of our work procedure, we have to ensure that all their efforts are basically really targeted or really concentrated upon the collection of the evidences, not merely the document, and that from the reliable sources. And for that purpose, the supervision on that team is equally important. Now again, what activities need to be done for the review and the supervision? There is no uniqueness because every engagement could be a different one, every assignment could be a different one. And so according to the planning, according to our scope, we have to determine the milestones about the review and about the supervision. It may be possible that on the daily basis, you may supervise the work so that the team members are right on the track, whether they are performing or putting all the efforts to collect the evidence. Standard 360 is dealing with the testifying before the competent authority. What is competent authority? So competent authority is judicial authority like the courts, adjudicating authorities like the tribunals, investigating agencies like the CBI, police, and forensic professional. Again, as Shailesh has given example, the same example just I will carry it ahead. Suppose we are carrying out the forensic assignment on behalf of a bank, and after completion of our assignment, our report is getting submitted to any of these agencies. So it could be our report is getting used for the further investigation, let's say by the police or by the CBI. So in such a situation, any of these competent authorities, they may require us to appear before them for the testing. What is testimony? Testimony means whatever the information or the data or the documents which we are submitting. It could be oral, it could be physical, it could be digital. In all ways, this testimony may take place. Again, as I said, the basic principles will travel across all the standards, and that's why, again, when we are appearing before this competent authority for testifying for the testimony, we should be very independent and we should be very objective in our approach. Now, when we are appearing before these authorities for the testimony, we are appearing in the two roles, two different roles, of course, not at the same time. Which are those two roles? Either we are appearing as a fact witness or as an expert witness. But the standard 360 standard is only dealing with the fact witness. The standard does not deal with the expert witness testimony. That is one important point which we all of us has to take a note of. The standard does not apply to the expert witness, because expert witness, that is something which is made a provision for in the Indian Evidence Act. So we are not going to discuss that part. So here we are appearing as a fact witness. What is the fact witness? I will just explain what is the difference between the fact witness and the expert witness so that all of us can understand it. As I said, expert witness is getting appointed as a subject matter expert by the court of law or by the adjudicating authority. Section 45 of the Indian Evidence Act deals with that. And in that case, that expert person has to submit the report to the court of law, and he may have to appear before that court of law as an expert witness. And his opinion will be considered as an expert opinion evidence. Again, that depends totally on the court. So we are in this standard, we are not going to talk about that. And what is the second witness? That is the fact witness. Since we have investigated the matter, since we have investigated the loan related dispute, we have gathered the information, we have gathered the evidences, and on the basis of evidences, we have submitted the report. For those things, there could be some questions, there could be some inquiry with us in a part of the testimony, and that is a fact. Now, there could be possibility that on the one hand, we are saying that we have to maintain the confidentiality about the assignments and whatever the data or the evidences we have gathered, maintaining the confidentiality. And the other hand, we have to give all the details related to that before this competent authorities. But the standard has clearly mentioned about that. In the point number 2, if you look at, when there is a conflict, the testifying professional's paramount duty shall be towards the competent. Important part is that before appearing as a fact witness, we should understand. Of course, we have dealt with the forensic assignment, so we know all the corners of that. I presume that because the forensic professional has executed the assignment, so he knows all the corners of the assignment. But when testifying before these authorities, he should understand the limit, the scope, and the boundaries. Whatever the questions coming to us, he should be able to identify those questions, whether those are pertaining within the scope or whatever the evidences which he or she has gathered during the process of the forensic. Otherwise, we should be able to say that this was not covered in the scope, or this was not the part of the assignment. So, in a short way, the boundaries of our engagement, the boundaries of our assignment should be known to us. And point number 5, the testifying professional shall adhere to the statutory provisions for deportation. There may be some possibilities. Of course, when the competent authorities are asking the forensic professional to appear before them for the testimony, I presume that all of them, or they mandatorily be followed their procedure, the legal procedures. But in certain cases, we have experienced that sometimes these competent authorities, they may just pass on the message to appear informally. There may not be a written communication, there may not be any email from these authorities to appear before. So in such a case, if really they want us as a fact witness there, we may have to request them to issue a return or an email for that kind of an appearance as a fact witness. That is because we should know, again, it's part of our standard that we should have a knowledge about certain laws and regulations while conducting the assignment, as well as because this is testifying before the competent, it could be a part of that engagement or the assignment work procedure. But we should know that what are the provisions when the authorities are asking us to appear before them for any testimony. So though the provisions of that laws are completely followed or not, that also we have to look into. Series 400 is dealing with the specialized areas. Because when we are conducting the assignment, we may have to apply certain specialized skill set. These skill sets could be in the form of data analysis. These skill sets could be in the form of discovery of the digital evidences. And nowadays, most of the forensic professionals are getting assignments of the loans or borrowing related disputes. And there was also a high expectation from the other stakeholders that there should be a specialized standards for the loans and borrowing related disputes. And that's why these three standards we have considered for these 400 series. In the 410 series, in the standard 410, which is related to the data analysis, all of us know that we may have, as a forensic assignment, we may have to analyze a lot of data. It could be on the various platforms. We may have to use a different tools for that. It could be specialized tool, it could be the Excel sheet based tools. And why we are doing that, why we are applying the data analysis, what is the objective about that? So we are analyzing some patterns of irregularities, duplicate payment related to the single invoices, analysis of the disbursement of the various amounts to the borrowers, number of times that particular payment or RTGS or NEFT has been transferred to a particular account. So all that pattern, the instances, the frequencies, all that we are trying to deal with this data analysis. That is the objective. Of course, that data analysis is a part of our planning. Data analysis is one of the work procedure, and it is along with the whatever the hypothesis we have formulated. For that, data analysis works need to be mandatory. Of course, that is what is assumed in this 400. So how to do that? So we have to develop the requirement of the data analysis. And for that, there should be a data analysis plan. Why that data analysis plan? Because what type of the data we require? Because what we are going to analyze and whatever we are collecting as a data, whether that data is relevant for the analysis which we are doing here, that needs to be considered in the data analysis. So what data is required? From whom that data is required? Who is going to give us that data? Because it could be the part of our chain of custody. Because we are going to either submit that data itself as an evidence, or we may get some triggers out of that data analysis so that the further evidence could be collected. So who is going to give us that data? And there was a question related to the data integrity. In the earlier discussions with the Shailaji, there was a question related to data integrity. So there are two approaches to look at that question. One, what Shailaji has discussed, and another, approach to look at the data integrity question is that whatever is the data I am collecting for the data analysis, whether in the larger context, it is dealing with the accuracy, relevancy, and reliability. All these three tests again we will have to test for the data integrity. Means what? So suppose we are taking the data to analyze a particular frequency of the invoices, whether the one invoices was paid 2 times, 3 times, that kind of thing. So one part is that we may get the data from, let us say, of XYZ software related database. That is one possibility. Second possibility, that at some time they will say that the stakeholders, primary stakeholders, which is giving that data, they may say that no, we don't have that original data, but we are giving you the backup of the data which we have stored, which we have taken from the originals. Now, in this case, there may be possibility of manipulation of certain things, and we should be very cautious enough to consider the data integrity of the original one and the backup. Then the data boundary. It depends upon the periodicity for which we are going to analyze the data. Otherwise, we are going to just cover the periodicity of, let's say, 1 year for the forensic purpose. Then what is the use of having the data of last 5 years with us? But if we want to analyze the historical incidents which may be required to prove the intention of certain fraudulent activities, then of course we may have to historically dig down to certain additional data. So that data boundary should also be decided as a part of the data analysis. After acquisition of the data, then we have to validate that data, we have to prepare that data, and then we have to analyze, as I said, what we want to discover out of that. As per that objective, we may use the data analysis tools, or we may use the Excel sheet kind of things to apply certain formulas or apply certain rules related to that data. And all that again needs to be documented. Of course, again, data confidentiality, integrity, archival related things, all that we have to keep in mind again. When we are submitting this data, as far as the evidences are concerned, we may have to follow certain provisions of basically the Indian Evidence Act, right? And in such a case, because data analysis could be one of the steps or one of the activities of our total activities, it may be possible that all the forensic professionals, they may not have that kind of a skill set, so they can take the help of the expert who can deal with that data analysis kind of techniques. That is what is a summary about this 410 standard. 420 standard, which is related to the evidence discovery in digital domain. In a practical language, we call it as a digital evidence. Why we are treating this as a specialized standard? Because again, discovery of evidences in digital domain. Because most, I may say, all of the entities where we are going to conduct these assignments, some sort of a digital domain is going to be in existence. It could be in the form of CBS, it could be in the form of ERP, it could be in the form of hybrid. Some activities may be on the ERP, Some activities could be on the standalone softwares. So it could be any mix. But basically it is a digital domain. And most of the evidences we are going to collect from this digital domain. So we all know for collecting of those evidences in the digital domain, we may have to use certain digital forensic tools. That kind of an expertise may be with the forensic professional, may not be with the forensic professional. But again, if it is a part of the work procedure, then certainly we can take the help of the expert, who could be the digital forensic expert, and he may discover the data or the evidences which could be useful as a digital evidence. Having said that, when we are collecting the digital evidences, whether again they are getting qualified as a digital evidences, we may have to apply some provision of the Indian Evidence Act. There is a provision for certification. There are certain conditions. What conditions are there? And that conditions I am going to correlate with these standards. The conditions in that Evidence Act says that the computers are continuously getting used. It should not be happen like that. For creation of the evidences, the computers are used. So computers are being used as a part of the regular business process. And data is also getting fed into the computer as a regular business activity. And most of the accounting records, most of the financial records are now getting maintained in the form of digital record. So in that environment, we are collecting or gathering the evidences. So basically, before gathering those evidences, all these requirement we need to keep in mind. And for that purpose, when we are going to collect those evidences, we should have understanding of overall information system environment within which we are going to collect the evidences. What is mean that? For example, whether the company has fully implemented ERP, the answer is yes. Whether the servers where the data is located, which we are going to collect, whether those servers are within the custody of the company, or the data is being maintained with some outsourced agents at some third party data center as a co-location. Or it may be possible that the data is getting maintained in the cloud environment. So extracting that data, collecting that data from cloud environment is different. From the co-location is different, because there is a total dependency of the forensic professional to avail those data from those third parties. Suppose it is within the company's premises, then that could be a different activity, or for that purpose, the different techniques might need to be used. It is also equally important that forensic professionals shall identify whether that data resides actually. It may be sometimes possible that data is on the particular laptop or particular device. So that understanding of the total information system architecture environment is very essential before we develop any procedure related to the discovery of these evidences in the digital world. Again, we have to evaluate ourselves whether we are having that competency or not. And as I said earlier, that if we don't have any competency, then we have to definitely take the help of the expert. Point number 4 here is talking about evidence gathered in the digital domain shall comply with the national laws. Again, here, as far as considering that digital domain related record as an evidence, we have to apply the test of Indian Evidence Act. There are multiple case laws which are dealing with the submission of the certificate along with the submission of that evidences. Then we should have a clarity when we are gathering the data from the cloud environment, who is going to issue that certification. If we are gathering that data from the outsourced agency, co-location kind of a data center, who is going to give that certification? Or when we are collecting directly from the servers of the stakeholders, what is our responsibility for submission of that certification? So that kind of an knowledge essentially be with us, or we can take, in that case also, if we are not expert, we can take the help of the legal expert to clarify something. And of course, we may have to apply the chain of custody, chain of evidences rules, and the details of the forensic tools, digital forensic tools, which the expert or we are going to apply to gather or collect those evidences. Standard 430 is dealing with the loans or borrowings. As I said, a lot of loan frauds are tabling out, and forensic professionals are getting opportunity for collecting the evidences related to this loan. But we have not restricted this 430 only to the loans or borrowings related disputes. Why I am saying so? Because yes, it covers of course the loans or borrowings. But when we look at the standards or when we use the words as a loans or borrowings, the immediate interpretation which we try to assume that loans or borrowings from the banks or loans or borrowings from the financial institution. That is what comes directly in our mind. Of course, these standards are dealing with those kind of a dispute, but in addition to that, the standards deals with the loans or borrowings even from non-banking, I mean, even from the individuals or funds raising in the form of share capital, any share capital, equity, preference, or even debentures. So it deals with the loans from the banks and financial institutions. It deals with the borrowings from the individuals also. It deals with the funding in the form of share capital, in the form of debentures. And what could be the major disputes in all these things? The misutilization of funds. So it could happen for the loans, it could happen for the borrowings, it could also happen for the share capital or for the debentures. Any ways of or any means by which the funds are getting raised. What is the misutilization of the funds? That means the purpose which is disclosed in the contractual agreement, the funds are not getting utilized for that purpose. That is a misutilization. There could be different types of the nature of dispute also that may be possible. One of the possible dispute is about the misutilization of the funds. And that is, as I said, which is not the compliance of the contractual terms and conditions. It may also be possible that some of the statutory or regulatory provisions also might have been violated while sanctioning or while utilizing those funds. It also be possible. So that kind of disputes are also covered in this standards. So when dealing with the loans or borrowing related forensic assignment, so professionals shall have a clarity about the nature of the dispute. It could get that clarity on the basis of, because it may be possible that for the loans and borrowing related assignment, that assignment could possibly from the banks or it could be from the resolution professional under the IPs. Or even it could be from the investigating agencies. The nature and scope differs from that. Mostly in these assignments, the work procedures may be related to the asset tracing or the money tracing kind of. Basically, when there is a loan frauds, especially which are we are going to deal with the banking loan related frauds, we have to take into the consideration the total flow of the transactions. When we are saying that it is a misutilization fund, it could be in the form of diversion. The money is utilized not for the purpose for which the loan is sanctioned, but it might have been utilized for creation of any other asset, which could be traced. But in case of a siphoning of the funds, where the money has gone, where the loan funds have been gone, it could not be at all traceable. That also part of the misutilization of funds. And related to that, related to the asset tracing, related to the monetary tracing, related to the misutilization of the funds, the professional is expected to collect the evidences, not only the accounting records, but actually the money trail where the money has gone related to that. Some of the examples of these disputes are also given as an illustrative list in the standards. Loan extended or obtained through inappropriate or unethical means. So there, the borrower is submitting the fabricated financial statements. The borrower is submitted the fabricated stock statements. The security related documents are also forged ones. So all these things could be there, and that could be the one of the reason of the dispute. So that is also possibility of this forensic assignment. As I said, the security related documents are forged ones. So the borrower is not having any ownership title, ownership right on that property, but he is claiming that he is having that. Loan is a contractual obligation. There is a loan agreement between the banks and the borrower. Also, when the funds are raised by various means, as I said, it is expected that it needs to be utilized for the purpose which are declared in the prospectus or otherwise in any other documents. And if funds are not utilized for that purpose, we need to trace out where the money has gone. That could be one of the nature of disputes. Disputes relating to the timely repayment of the interest on the and principal, there could be dispute that borrowers are saying that no, we have paid it on the timely basis and the bank has not applied the correct amount of the interest there. So these are some of the examples which may be the scope of the forensic assignment. The next two series, 500 and 600, are dealing with the reporting and the quality. Of course, 510 is very, very important standard in this forensic assignment. Why? Because the outcome of all our efforts in the forensic services are getting demonstrated, are getting submitted in the form of the report. So in every assignment, it is required to submit a final written report. So the standard 510 deals with the final formal written report to be submitted to the Prime Minister. Why I am saying that is a final, I have purposefully used that word because it may be the requirement from the appointing agency or from the primary stakeholder that after some time periodicity, the professional is expected to submit the progress reports or interim reports. That is not a part of this 510. That could be the part of 250. Standard 250, not a part of 510. So this standard is only related to the final report which we are submitting as a conclusion of this. Of course, to whom the report we are going to address? With the primary stakeholders. And we all know that right now, because of the variety of the nature of this engagement, there is no fixed format of this report. But essentially, and that is a part of FIS 250, when we are accepting the assignment, we should have a clarity between us and the appointing agency or the primary stakeholder that what could be the format of the final report. So we should agree with the stakeholders, primary stakeholders, or with the appointing. So at that time, we will fix the format, and that format will have to follow while submitting the final. It may be possible that some additional things you might have to add into that, but that needs to be informed to the primary stakeholder again as a part of FIS. What could be the pointers in the report? Definitely, we are going to take some illustrative list of. What are the two important factors out of these two factors? 4, 5, and 6 bullet points here. What the point number 4 is talking about? Sometimes the form and content of report is mandated by some law or by some statute. It is possible. In that case, or there could be certain guidelines or provisions into certain laws or in certain regulations. So when we are submitting the report, or even at the time of acceptance of the report, we should have knowledge about that, and accordingly we should fix the format of that, and that should be communicated as a part of APIs. Point number 5 is talking that report shall highlight any key assumption made, that is number 1, and whether any limitations faced by the professional. As I said, when we are planning the things, when we are planning for the assignment, we make some assumptions. And as and when the assignment gets progress, some of the things get changed. Circumstances may get changed. Some of the important evidences which we are looking for are getting destroyed. Some of the information which was essentially be required, that is getting manipulated. The custody of certain documents, which we are assumed that it could be with certain authority, but it is not now available. Or there could be the limitation in the form of safety to our life, life-threatening situation, so that we may not able to enter into that particular area to gather the evidence. There is also possibility that we may assume that the cloud service provider will provide the certain data in certain fashion, but subsequently is denied. Now it is well explained in the 250 that these limitations needs to be immediately communicated to the stakeholder. That is point number 1. But these limitations essentially be the part of the final report, because of these limitations, our final conclusion is going to be affected. We may not able to conclude in the right manner. We may not able to conclude at all. Any of these possibilities would be possible. So these limitations, which we have communicated as a part of the 250, may have again to be reported along with its impact on our report, or basically on the conclusion part, because we are not able to collect the evidences about that. That is very important, point number 5. And point number 6, the report shall not express an opinion or pass any judgment or on guilt or innocence. Now, there is a lot of misunderstanding when the certain agencies are appointing us and their expectation from our report. So suppose a company is appointing us for certain fraud related to the inventory. They are expecting us to name the fraudster in the report. That XYZ is a guilty for that fraud. They are expecting, that is their expectation, to name the fraudsters in the report. But forensic professional is not authorized, is not the authority to say that XYZ is a guilty person. Absolutely, it is the authority with the court of law. Even mentioning XYZ under certain offenses as a charge of the offenses is not the authority of the forensic. It is the authority with the investigating agencies like the police or CBI. And then they may submit the evidences to the court of law on the basis of which the court will pass the judgment. So it is not within the scope, or it is not within the authority of the forensic professional to pass on such guilt or even the innocence. Then what we are going to do? We are going to submit the report on the facts, on the basis of evidences. Means what? This is a theory. Means what? So yes, when we are doing the forensic for the loan frauds, we are tracing out the money trail and we are finding out that money has been transferred from this loan account to XYZ account. Whether XYZ is anyway related for that loan purpose with the borrower, that we can establish by some evidence. Whether he was a supplier, whether he was providing certain whether certain materials for that project purpose, or whether he was not. And in that fashion, whether the loan amount was used for the specific purpose or not, that we may confirm. But whether borrower is of guilty or whether that XYZ is a party to that guilty, we may not able to comment. But yes, we may able to comment that money has been transferred from the borrower's loan account to the XYZ. What is the XYZ's relation with the borrower? If the evidences are available, we can establish that, okay, these evidences are available, so they are related party, they are connected party. They have supplied, they have not supplied anything. They are accumulated kind of things. So all that we can brought it forward only as a factual things on the basis of evidences. But because of that, we cannot mention that the borrower is a guilty person. That bank has to take a call by further taking the legal actions with the investigator. That is one important point, because many of the times we are getting this complaint, and that is the reason that there was a second question in the discussion, that what is the possibility that same scope may be given to the two different forensic professionals. It is possible, because sometimes it happens that what is expected out of the first forensic professional report, that has not been come out. And the expectation of the stakeholders, no, the name should appear that he or she is guilty. And that's why that assignment have gone to the second professional. Right? But the standard has taken a clear stand. Of course, we have to take a lot of efforts to communicate these things to the various primary stakeholders or other stakeholders in that case, and even to the investigating agencies or to the other stakeholders. We may have to make them aware that what is our role, what is our scope, and what is our responsibility. Time frame for the reports, again, that might have been defined in our acceptance or the engagement. Point number 7 here, which is talking about that it may be possible that we are not able to complete the assignment because of any reason. In that case, whether we are going to submit any formal written report, it's not possible because we have not done anything. Or we may have done certain initial work procedure, but subsequent to that, because of the changed circumstances or because of certain developments, we are not able to collect the evidences. So it's not a completion of the. So in that case, a status report, including the disclaimers, including our limitation and what is the status, we can submit it as a report. That is what is mentioned in the point number 6. Some of the pointers which we have to take care of, we have to submit it to the or included in the reports. Of course, the title, we are addressing the report to the primary stakeholders. What was the scope and objective of the assignment? What was the broad methodology we have followed as a work procedure? We need to submit an executive summary. Executive summary needs to be dealt with the core findings. Of course, the findings will always be on the basis of the evidences. If we have used the services of some expert, then we have to refer to their report also. It could be the part of our report. Importantly, as we mentioned in the statutory audit, we have to mention in the report that this assignment has been conducted in accordance with this FIS. It may be possible that in all the circumstances, in all types of the assignment, all the standards may not be applicable or you may not be able to apply that. In that case, what is the reason for that and any deviation from the standards that we can mention also in the report. Any assumptions, limitation, as I said, I have already discussed that any assumptions or limitations or disclaimers which is having the impact on the conclusion or on the reporting that we have to mention, and importantly, the conclusion related or based upon the evidence. The last standard which we are going to discuss and then we are going to stop, that is 610, quality control, quality continuous improvement. Now there are 2 stages of the quality review. One, before the completion of the assignment, and second phase, post completion of the assignment. Quality control, pre-completion of the assignment. So there should be some sort of a quality checklist before submitting the final reports. So whatever is the expected work procedures to be followed by the planning, whatever is the evidences we are considering as an evidences on the basis of which we are concluding whether they are really pass the test and the criteria which we have applied to qualify them as an evidences. Again, here at that pre-completion stage, if you are in doubt, again you can take the help of the legal expert. The way we are submitting the reports, because after submission we cannot apply this quality control mechanism. So before submission of the reports, all these quality control criteria, and that is our responsibility. That is our responsibility as a professional to develop the certain criteria which needs to be checked before submission of these findings or the report. That is pre-completion criteria. Post-completion criteria are, it could be in the larger context. It could be in the context of an overall forensic services department in our firm. And that criteria, again, we have to develop as an SOPs. We have to assess ourselves if anything has gone wrong into this kind of an assignment or the engagement, and how to develop that, how to take a precaution about that for the next engagement. So that quality control system, that quality control mechanism with the quality criteria or the, in a simple language, the quality checklist needs to be developed by the professional. You can have the quality control review. Of course, at the pre-completion stage, you can have the quality assessment by a partner who is not a part of that assignment. That is very important. In case of a quality control review, you can do that within the organization, or you can take the help of the peer organization or peer. As a part of the quality control improvement, it's a continuous process. We learn from earlier mistake, and that is the best way to learn. But to keep ourselves updated, because all this forensic is a part of the legal proceedings, so we have to keep ourselves updated with these legal proceedings, and that's why whatever the CP hours we are attending, 40% of the CP hours out of that we should dedicatedly be attending, which is the topics or the subjects related to this forensic area. That is what we have at this present recommended with this 610 kind of quality control standards. So by this, we are coming to an end about the discussion. Pratik, now we can take the questions.
Yes, Surajji, we have two questions.
Yes, please, Pratik.
One is from member from Vadodara.
Yes,
When
sir.
tools are used for data analysis, what would be documentation as to satisfaction on reliability of its outcome and conclusion based thereon?
So, first question is related to what could be the tools, right?
Yeah.
If I have understood correctly.
Yeah.
So, tools depends upon the nature of the analysis. I'm basically talking about what is the nature of the analysis. Basically, all of us, we are well aware about the Excel analysis. That is point number one. So, whether to use Excel as an analysis tool, or there are other n numbers of tools which are available in the market. So, which tool is suitable for me? So, it depends upon number one, what kind of an data we are gathering for the analysis purpose. So, suppose there is a data which is in the PDF kind of an format or in some other file format. So, it required 2 or 3 steps before we really apply the analysis rules or analysis formulas, we may say. So, suppose the data is in the PDF format. So, before applying the analysis tool in the form of Excel analysis, we have to convert that PDF data into the Excel format. So, there we may require one more tool. But in the market, the tools are available which will take that PDF data, which will convert that data, and which will give that data available for the Excel analysis. So it totally depends upon what is the type of the data we are gathering, what data is available with us, and according to that, the tool should be suitable for that. So if the PDF data is available, it is better to have that tool which will convert in all single procedure in a single software instead of using the multiple softwares. Why I'm saying so? Because when we are using the multiple softwares, we may have to keep all that softwares in a loop and maintain the chain of custody there also. Now, what happens here? I will give an example. Most of the time, suppose the data is available in the PDF, the forensic professional may not have the tool to convert that PDF into the Excel. So there are various open sites available on the internet which the professional may attempt to convert that data from that open sources into the Excel. Here, we have to consider the basic principle about the confidentiality. By doing so, whether we are sharing that data on the open source to somebody X. So that threat is always there. So it is better to convert those data and process for all the analysis in a single umbrella, in a single tool. That is my suggestion. Number two, about the reliability and the relevancy. Of course, as I said, the source from which we are gathering the data, who is giving us, whether the cloud service provider is giving us, whether any chief information technology officer is giving us, or we are extracting that data. So the method of gathering the data and the documentation related to that is very, very essential, because that is a requirement again under the Evidence Act to prove the relevancy and reliability. But having said that, whether the data which we are collecting, that has to pass the test of the integrity, because it may be possible that if we are getting the data from the backup, what about the security of that backup? Whether there is a possibility of manipulation within that backup data, that always we have to consider, and it is better to understand and maintain the documentation from the source and the method by which we have gathered the data, and comparison with that data with certain amount of the current transaction flow or the current data, that will prove a certain kind of an integrity of that data. So these precautions we have to take about the data analysis.
Yes, Udayji, one more question we have from Mumbai, Prajakta from Mumbai.
Yes.
Where can I get soft copy of these standards? I could get only draft exposure on ICI website.
No, now it is final component is available on the ICI website. So you can just link. You can search on the any search engine. You will get the link of that. If you are interested and if it is possible, I can directly share if the chat box I will be able to get. Let me check. So yeah, I think chat box is there. So just I'm sharing the soft copy of that in the chat box itself. So I think I have uploaded in the chat box. So anybody who is interested, they can download.
Okay. Next question is, what are the prerequisite experience, technical skills, etc. for starting a practice in forensic domain?
Basically, we are chartered accountants. So I'm assuming here that we are having experience in accounting and auditing. If we have a good kind of an experience in the auditing, whatever be the type of the auditing, that will help us a lot in understanding this forensic area. In addition to the forensic, in addition to this auditing skill, what we are requiring is understanding about the legal proceedings, understanding of the legal provisions. That is, at least I'm not saying that we should be expert into that, but some primary understanding of the legal proceedings. And if we are having certain kind of a skill set related to the digital domain or the data analysis, that will be an additional bonus. It is not mandatory, but that will be the bonus. Yes.
That's it, sir. There are no other questions. Thank you, Udaji. Thank you, CA Uday Kulkarni ji, for delivering valuable insights. I'm sure this session has made some value addition to the pool of our base. Thank you so much, sir, for sparing some time for Hisar branch of NIRC. Thank you so much on behalf of Hisar branch, on behalf of DAP team. Thank you so much, Uday ji.
Thank you all the participants, and wish you all a very, very happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year to all of you. Happy New Year to all the participants from Hisar branch of NIRC. So, thank you, sir. Thank you so much.